They threw her out like she was nothing, but they didn't know she was married to the man who owned the building. If you had seen Danielle Mercer that morning, you would have thought she had the world in her hands. It was early, a sharp Monday in downtown Des Moines, Iowa, just as the city was waking up with the usual swirl of honking cars and fresh coffee smells pouring from street corners. Danielle stood outside the tall glass building of Silverpine Technologies, a company she'd researched, prepared for, and dreamed about working at for months. She smoothed out her navy blue blazer, adjusted the simple gold necklace her mother had given her years ago, and whispered a little pep talk under her breath. "You deserve to be here. You're ready." And she was. With over 10 years of hard-won experience in project management, Danielle had handled tight deadlines, led international teams, and cleaned up more messes than she could count. She wasn't coming in as a charity case. She was coming in as someone who could build things. Inside the lobby, the air was cool and smelled faintly of polished floors and expensive cologne. The receptionist, a young woman with pink nails tapping against her keyboard, barely looked up as Danielle checked in. She gave her name. Danielle Mercer, 10:30 interview, and waited, hands folded tightly over her portfolio. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Other candidates, younger, paler, walked in, got ushered upstairs almost immediately. Danielle stayed seated, feeling more and more like she was becoming invisible in that slick, shiny lobby. Still, she kept telling herself it was nothing. Maybe they were just running behind. Maybe the hiring team was tied up. She wasn't about to jump to conclusions. Not yet. Finally, after what felt like a full hour, a tall man in an ill-fitting suit and a half-smirk called out her name. "Danielle Mercer?" He didn't shake her hand. He didn't even smile. Just turned sharply on his heel and said, "This way," like she was already an inconvenience. Danielle picked up her bag and followed him down a hallway lined with photos of grinning executives, shaking hands in boardrooms she would probably never be invited into. But she didn't let it show. She walked tall, with the kind of quiet grace you only earn after being doubted 100 times before. But little did she know, the real interview hadn't even started yet. The interview room looked more like a broom closet than a professional space. Flickering fluorescent lights buzzed above, and a whiteboard still had half-erased notes from some earlier meeting. 3 people sat around a scratched-up oval table, 2 men in wrinkled shirts and a woman who barely glanced up from her phone. Danielle set her portfolio down carefully, offering a smile to each of them. Only one of them, the woman, bothered to return it, and even then, it was the kind of smile you give when you're pretending to be polite. Kyle Dempsey, the man who had called her in, flopped into a chair, spread his legs wide like he owned the whole floor, and leaned back. "So, Danielle," he said, dragging out her name like it tasted funny in his mouth, "tell us why you think you're a good fit for a tech company like ours." The way he said it, the way he emphasized tech company, it wasn't a question, it was a challenge. Danielle didn't flinch. She'd been here before, in 1,000 different ways. She launched into her pitch, breaking down her experience leading multi-million-dollar rollouts, managing global teams, streamlining workflows. She spoke clearly, confidently, not bragging, but not shrinking either. Halfway through, she noticed Kyle glance at one of the other men, trying, and failing, to hide a smirk. The woman with the phone let out a little cough that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Danielle pushed forward anyway, because what else could she do? She had earned her right to be there. She wasn't about to let a few childish faces throw her off. When she finished speaking, Kyle looked at her for a long, painful second. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table like he was about to share some big secret. "You know," he said, voice dripping fake sweetness, "we're really looking for someone who just fits better with our brand image." Danielle blinked. "I'm sorry. Could you clarify?" He chuckled like she was the one being slow. "You know," he said again, giving her a once-over that made her stomach twist, "someone who represents where we're headed, young, fresh, dynamic." The woman on the phone finally looked up and nodded, as if that made it official. Danielle sat there, feeling the heat rise in her chest. She knew exactly what they were saying without saying it. She wasn't young enough. She wasn't light enough. She wasn't them, and they didn't even have the guts to spell it out. But as Danielle gripped the edges of her chair to keep from shaking, she had no idea just how far this humiliation was about to go. Kyle tapped his pen against the table, a lazy rhythm that scraped against Danielle's nerves. "You know what?" he said finally, tossing her resume onto the table like it was trash. "I think we're done here. No thank you, no polite, We'll be in touch. Just that. The other two barely looked at her as they stood up and gathered their things like she wasn't even worth another second of their time. Danielle sat frozen for a beat, stunned at how fast it all fell apart. As she stood, gathering her bag and her pride, Kyle, still not done, muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe next time, try something a little more polished." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a slap. The woman with the phone snorted out a laugh she didn't bother hiding. Danielle could feel her throat tightening, her hands starting to shake. But she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She pressed her lips together, nodded once, not to them, but to herself, and walked out the door with her head high. The hallway back to the lobby felt about 10 miles long. A young guy in a hoodie and sneakers was walking toward her, chatting and laughing with Kyle, who had come up behind her. As she passed, she heard Kyle say under his breath, "Man, who thought she was going to fit in here?" The words hit her like a slap between the shoulder blades, but she kept moving, straight through the lobby, straight past the receptionist, who barely looked up, straight out the heavy glass doors into the parking lot. The cold air outside bit at her cheeks, but it felt better than the stifling fake air inside. She sat in her car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing hard, willing herself not to cry. Not because she was ashamed, because she was furious. She had done everything right. She had prepared. She had believed. She had walked in with her heart open, and they treated her like she was a mistake that somehow wandered into their perfect little world. Danielle wiped her face quickly and started the car. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she threw one last look at the towering glass building behind her. They didn't deserve her. They never had. But inside that building, in an office Danielle had never seen, someone had just found out what happened, and they were not about to let it slide. 2 floors above the chaos Danielle had just walked out of, Christopher Mercer stood by his office window, staring down at the parking lot. He watched Danielle's car pull away, his jaw tightening so hard he thought he might crack a tooth. He had no idea she was interviewing there that morning. Danielle wanted to get the job on her own merits. No favors, no shortcuts. That was who she was. And Christopher respected her for it, but watching her speed away, wiping at her face, he knew something had gone horribly wrong. Christopher didn't waste a second. He picked up the phone, dialed his assistant. "Get me the head of hiring," he said, voice flat. "Now." Across the building, there was a ripple of confusion. Emails pinged, phones buzzed, people who thought they were safe suddenly started scrambling. Christopher Mercer wasn't some figurehead CEO who smiled for cameras and signed papers. He was a builder, a fixer, and when he saw rot, he ripped it out from the roots. When the head of hiring finally walked in, a thin man named Randall who smelled faintly of fear, Christopher didn't bother with small talk. "I want a list," Christopher said, tossing a notepad onto the conference table. "Every candidate interviewed this morning, every person who interacted with them." Randall blinked. "Sir, is there a specific issue?" Christopher gave him a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You could say that." Within an hour, Christopher had it all. The schedule, the interviewer assignments, the notes scribbled in the margins, including a few nasty comments about Danielle's lack of fit and poor cultural alignment. He closed the folder slowly, staring at Randall like he was seeing him for the first time. "You know," Christopher said, voice low, "sometimes companies don't fall apart because the market changes. They fall apart because of the people sitting right inside these walls." Randall shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Christopher stood up, tucking the folder under his arm. "Tell Kyle Dempsey," he said, already walking toward the door, "to be in the conference room at 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow. And tell him," he added without looking back, "he might want to bring a towel." But Kyle Dempsey wasn't worried. Not yet. Because he still thought he was the smartest man in the room. The next morning, Silverpine Technologies' conference room on the 22nd floor looked like a war room before the first shot. Kyle Dempsey strolled in 5 minutes late, holding a half-finished coffee, looking around with a cocky grin. He wore the same wrinkled dress shirt from yesterday and didn't even bother to tuck it in properly. To him, this was just another one of those corporate talks, some boring meeting about numbers or quotas. Christopher was already there, standing at the head of the long glass table. The senior leadership team, people Kyle usually tried to impress, sat stiffly around the room, glancing at their phones or tapping their pens, clearly uncomfortable. Kyle flopped into a chair, took a loud sip of his coffee, and leaned back like he had all day. "So, what's this about?" he said, smirking. "Somebody blow up the coffee machine again?" Christopher didn't answer. He just looked at Kyle, long enough that Kyle started to fidget a little. Then Christopher spoke, his voice calm, almost casual. "Let's talk about what happened yesterday during the interviews." Kyle shrugged. "What about it?" "You interviewed a candidate named Danielle Mercer," Christopher said, pulling out a thick manila folder and laying it flat on the table. "Tell me what happened." Kyle laughed, shifting in his seat. "Look, not everybody's a fit. You know how it is. She was fine. But come on, man, this is Silver Pine. We're looking for people who look the part. Fresh faces, cutting edge. You get what I'm saying." He leaned back, grinning like he had just cracked a joke only he found funny. The room went deathly still. Christopher tapped the folder once with his finger. "Danielle Mercer," he said, still calmly, "is a decorated project manager with 15 years of experience leading some of the biggest tech rollouts in the Midwest. She's published, she's respected, she's trusted." Kyle's smirk faltered a little. Christopher took a step closer. "And she's also my wife." Silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that feels like gravity just tripled inside the room. Kyle's coffee slipped slightly in his hand, sloshing over the rim. He opened his mouth, searching for a joke, a way out, anything, but nothing came out. Christopher didn't blink. "You didn't just embarrass a candidate yesterday," Christopher said, voice dropping lower. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed this company. You showed everyone in that room exactly who you are when you think no one's looking." Kyle started stammering. I didn't know." "Look, man, if I had known..." Christopher cut him off with a single raised hand. "You treated her exactly how you treat anyone you think can't fight back. That's the real problem." Kyle's face flushed bright red, his hands fluttering uselessly like he wanted to defend himself but had no weapons left. Christopher reached for the pitcher of water sitting at the center of the table. Without warning, he calmly lifted it and poured the entire thing over Kyle's head. The cold splash echoed around the silent room. Kyle gasped, sputtering, clutching at his soaked shirt. Water dripped onto the expensive carpet, spreading into a dark puddle around his chair. Christopher set the empty pitcher down with a soft thud. "Meeting adjourned," he said, and turned on his heel without another word. But Christopher wasn't done yet, because cleaning house was about to get a whole lot messier. The moment Christopher walked out of that conference room, the whole building felt like it shifted. Whispers spread like wildfire through every hallway, every break room, every elevator. People who thought they were untouchable suddenly felt their desks get a little too warm under them. Within the hour, Kyle Dempsey was officially suspended, pending a full review. But anyone paying attention knew what that really meant. He was done. Emails went out to every department head, mandatory interviews, anonymous surveys. Every ugly little thing that had been swept under the rug for years was about to be dragged into the sunlight. Christopher didn't just want Kyle gone. He wanted the whole rotten system Kyle had flourished in to be ripped out by the roots. By the end of the week, 5 managers, 2 directors, and a handful of senior recruiters were either fired or forced to resign. Every one of them had been part of the same quiet, smiling machine that had shut people like Danielle out without ever saying it out loud. HR policies were rewritten. Bias training wasn't just suggested, it was required, top to bottom. For the first time in years, the company actually looked around and asked who they were missing from the table. And Danielle? She got a call the next Monday from Randall, the same man who had been too scared to speak up before. Voice shaking slightly, he offered her the position she had originally applied for. More money, more perks, more promises. Danielle listened politely. She let him say his piece, listing all the reasons why it would be a great fresh start and how things had changed. Then she smiled, a real smile, not the forced kind she'd had to wear that day in the conference room, and answered him in the calmest voice you can imagine. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid I have to decline. I'm building something better somewhere else." Click. She hung up without a second thought, because Danielle understood something now. Sometimes the best revenge isn't walking back into a place that tried to tear you down. It's building a life so strong they can't reach you anymore. But Danielle's story didn't just end with walking away. It was about setting an example, one that would ripple far beyond that glass building in downtown Des Moines. Danielle didn't look back once, not when the headlines hit the local news about Silverpine's sudden leadership restructuring, not when former coworkers slid into her LinkedIn messages with weak apologies, not even when recruiters started circling, trying to poach her with promises they should have made long ago. Instead, she poured her energy into something new. She partnered with two other women she trusted, women who knew exactly what it felt like to be overlooked, doubted, and shut out. Together, they launched their own consultancy firm right there in Iowa, focused on building real opportunities for underrepresented talent. Within a year, their client list was packed. Startups, mid-sized companies, even some of the same big names that once shut their doors in her face were now paying for her expertise. Danielle didn't just create a career for herself. She created a door and held it open for everyone coming after her. And Christopher? He stood right by her side, quietly proud, knowing that sometimes the best thing you can do is get out of the way and let the right person shine. Because at the end of the day, the real victory wasn't revenge. It was proof. Proof that you don't have to twist yourself into someone else's idea of worthy. Proof that your value isn't decided in some cold conference room by people too small to see it. Proof that walking away from the wrong room can lead you straight into the right future. And if there's anything you take from Danielle's story, let it be this. When a door closes in your face, don't waste your time banging on it. Build your own, and make it bigger, stronger, and wide enough for others to walk through too. If this story hit you anywhere close to home, share it. Somebody out there needs to hear it today. And if you're standing outside a door that's been slammed in your face, just remember, sometimes getting thrown out is the first step toward building something better.